I'm Dory Hayley. I'm a Canadian soprano, and I'm currently visiting assistant professor at Mount Allison University in New Brunswick. And my practice centers on working with composers and premiering new works, both as a freelance performer and as the artistic director of the Blue Ridge Chamber Music Festival in Vancouver.
My name is Camilo Mendez. I am a Colombian composer, and I am currently based in Hong Kong. And for that reason, we are doing this simultaneously from two different locations. And my work involves collaborating extensively with the performers for whom I am writing. And today we're gonna discuss our work together with Dory. I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and we will start with the presentation immediately. The presentation today is titled Composer Performance Explorations in the Vocal Works of Camilo Mendez. And we have prepared this abstract, which explains the structure of our presentation. And also in this abstract, you can see some of the key elements of my compositional practice, such as the fact that I compose musical cycles. So all of my pieces are organized as a group of pieces based on the same musical materials and ideas. And also the fact that in this particular set of pieces that we're gonna discuss today, I collaborated, as I mentioned before, with soprano Dory Hayley. And through this extensive collaboration with her, we have, in a way, really redefined our musical practices, and we have developed a collaborative bond that I hope will keep inspiring us to produce works in the future. So today we're going to discuss specifically three pieces from three different compositional cycles. Plegaria Muda, one for solo voice, that was our first collaboration. You will hear the full performance of the piece at the end of the presentation. Our second collaboration belongs to the cycle Archipelago Sierpinski, and it's called Uslar, Gorong. And in this piece, I ask Dory to sing, but also at the same time to perform actions and to produce sounds inside the piano. And our most recent collaboration belongs to the cycle BURSZTYN, which is called Minimaquina 3. And in this piece, I use an object that I modified, and Dory has to sing through this modified megaphone. And also I use prepared flute and three pianists. So I will explain in detail how this happened and why the instrumentation was decided the way it was decided and how this piece happened.
So in this presentation, we're going to talk about how our collaboration has been, in some ways, a sort of symbiotic relationship. For me, this work has occurred both in parallel with, and to some extent has spurred kind of a significant shift in my musical practice and in my identity as a performer. I started out thinking of myself as a bel canto soprano, and grew to embrace a much wider palette of sounds and techniques as central to my musical practice. So we see through that the composer-performer relationship can be a two-way street and can influence not only the compositional outputs of the relationship, but also can influence the performer's technique and identity, and that influence can carry on to future projects.
So The cycle Plegaria Muda was inspired by the work of the Colombian artist Dory and specifically, and specifically the installation Plegaria Muda. So that's why I took that title. This installation is very nice because it's a set of tables that, depending on the space where it's being exhibited, takes different forms. And that was very important for me. And you will see when we talk about the structure of the piece, why this became so relevant in the piece. And also, since I was working with a voice, I decided to use a text that I took from the novel 2666 by Chilean writer Roberto Bolaño. You can see the text in there. And by choosing this text, I realized there were already some structural elements embedded in the text that through an analysis I discovered, and I used them to compose the piece. I will talk a little bit more about those elements in this slide. So I realized that there were 3 sentences in the piece. So I decided that the piece, since the installation, it has many different ways in which can be exhibited in different places. So I decided that I will have 3 main sections, each one corresponding to one of the sentences of the text. And I will have 2 shorter sections that I call interrupters to kind of create contrast or to disrupt the flow of the piece. And by having these 5 sections that in this case Dory could put together in any order. So the piece will have many different versions. And this is a sort of like a schema of how the structure of the piece might work. I don't know if you have any comments about this as a performer.
Yeah, well, I mean, this setup gave me multiple different ways to perform the piece, and depending on my mood or depending on the space where the piece was performed, I'm able to change them around, which gives it a different flavor each time it's performed. So in order to compose this piece, we met at the Banff Center in 2016, and we had extensive exploratory sessions. And by exploratory sessions, I mean, I thought about the sounds and how I wanted to work on this piece. I met with Dory. I asked her about what was possible, or how things worked. She showed me some techniques. And after that, I went back to my studio and I composed, but it was always a back and forth working process. And here you can see some of the notation, the way that I notated some of these techniques. And also something very important was the fact that this was the first piece that I wrote for voice. So I was still getting my head around this very specific instrument, which is the voice. Yeah, and these exploratory sessions were also interesting for me. The preparation of this piece for me coincided with a period where I was really exploring a lot of extended techniques. I was also working on pieces like Berrios Sequenza 3 and Lachenmann Got Lost, pieces that have somewhat, similar musical language. And working on this piece really consolidated that work. Technically, as you'll hear later, it's quite an etude of extended techniques, and requires jumping from the normal singing mode to a variety of techniques very quickly. And I found that as a performer, I needed to practice in a very specific way to be able to do all of those quick changes while maintaining my vocal health. So that kind of facility was something I was able to carry on to other pieces. And also I found that the experience of commissioning this piece gave me a sense of ownership over these extended techniques. that Camilo had written for me, so that I was able to also carry that sense of ease and ownership with this type of vocal sound into other pieces that I approached.
This is another example of some of the techniques that I use and the way that I use to notate it. So as Dory said, the most traditional singing material is notated straightforward with a treble clef and the 5 staves, but the other material is notated using this different set of lines and different symbols to represent the different types of sound that I'm looking. This is an example just to show you the manuscript that I did all by hand. And this is an example of the final, of the same excerpt with the final version on the computer software.
I saw the manuscript version. It's so clear. Your manuscript is beautiful.
Yeah, I try to do it nicely, but sometimes doesn't work that way. So you will hear the final performance of the piece at the end. So now I think very quickly we need to go to the next collaboration. So probably maybe Dory, you can tell us about this next collaboration of how that happened.
Yeah, so I was so delighted with our work on Plegaria Muda and the piece that Camilo wrote. And so I also perform in a duo with a Venezuelan pianist, Manuel Laufer. We've been working together for at least 15 years. And so we decided to ask Camilo to write a second piece for that ensemble.
So in this piece, it was in a way a very easy thing to, a very easy project to start, because I have developed lots of materials with Dory for Plegaria Muda. So I had lots of material that I didn't use in Plegaria Muda. So I call them like residual compositional material that I thought that there was still potential to be used. So when Dory said, oh, ask me to write a piece for the duo, I thought I'm gonna use this residual material. But in this case, the piece belongs to a completely different compositional cycle. So in this cycle, I'm trying to work with modular structure. So the whole cycle is modular in the sense that the pieces can be performed in any order, but the pieces itself can be performed in any order. So it's a collection of collections that can be performed in many different orders. And the title alludes to that fact, because it uses the fractal de Sierpinski triangle. And since Manuel is Venezuelan, and in this cycle I'm trying to pay the homage to writers that I admire, so I call it Uslar, because he's a Venezuelan writer, Arturo Uslar Pietri, and to make like a connection with Venezuela, with South American literature. And Uslar Gorong is because I was at that time moving to Southeast Asia, so I was thinking about this geographical place where I will be living, so I decided to combine those two references in this specific piece for Dory and Manuel Laufer. This is an example of the modular structure. So here you can see the different sections and how I sort of conceptualize how they could be combined. So I use colors and different lengths or different widths of rectangles and squares to kind of give me a representation of how these modular structures might work. And for this session as well, we did extensive exploratory sessions at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University. So we were actually very lucky to spend like a full whole week just working day and night on this piece. We did different sessions. So I did sessions only with Dory, I did sessions only with Manuel, and after that, we did sessions in which we were working, the three of us, trying to develop these textures, because as you can see, Dory performs mostly inside. Actually, Dory performs only inside the piano. So it was a completely new thing for me, and I think for her, because as you might see later on, I had to develop ways to notate this and to think about this, but Dory had to figure out how to do this as a performer. I don't know if you have any comments.
Yeah, this was, I realized performing this piece how tied I am to relating to the audience and to be able to look at the audience. So looking away into the piano the entire time was strange at first and became wonderful.
So this is an example of some of the sketches or some of the ideas, the way that I notated in my sketchbook when I was working with Dory. So I have this for Dory. I have also a lot of pages for Manuel, and I have a lot of pages for the combination of both of them. So I just wanted to show you how these actually work. And these ones are the two sections that I restricted the actions of Dory to these two sections of the piano. So the notation is very similar to the notation of the pianist, but from a different perspectives. So in a way, what is down for the piano is up for the soprano. So as a composer, it's also very weird because you will have to, the soprano is kind of doing, the notation is kind of like a mirror of the notation of the pianist. So it was very confusing.
And I remember you had to make quite a few changes because I'm left-handed. So you found that things that you thought would work in a certain way were actually backwards because of my coordination.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, in these exploratory sessions, I bring my ideas and I talk to the performer and we kind of go back and forth until we find like a final solution. But in this case, I'm right-handed, so I tried all these techniques inside of the piano in the way I will do it, which is some things with the right hand and some things with the left hand. But when I was trying it with you, we realized that you will do it differently. So in the final score, I have to not only think of your part as a mirror of what Manuel is doing, but also switch hands. So that was also challenging in a way. And this is an example of the objects that you use. And this is Dory trying out some of the techniques.
Yeah, and for me, developing the coordination to use all of these instruments was really challenging. And again, this kind of coincided with a shift in my musical practice. In this case, like before I was taking on all of this new palette of vocal colors. And in this case, I was experimenting with bringing external sounds into my musical performances. So accompanying myself at the keyboard or using percussion instruments, or in some cases, I was becoming familiar with just performing, not singing, but only using instruments. And because this particular piece was so challenging physically, and so sort of intricate, I developed a lot of confidence and a lot of technique, I guess, that I was able to take to other pieces. And I subsequently actually ended up commissioning pieces that involved extrinsic sounds and other instruments along with my voice.
So this is an example of the notation for Dory. So every single action that she produces at the piano is notated. So I notated it simply by notating each hand separately. So things that she does with the right hand are notated. And at the same time, things with the left hand, for example, when she uses both hands. And because she's also singing, I also have an extra stave that is for the voice. So in a way, I think for Dory could be also challenging the fact that I try to be very clear, but also try to be very concrete in the way that I notate the pieces, the piece. So the easiest way that I found, and I don't know if it's a good solution or not, but I decided to notate it in 3 staves. So the 2 hands and the voice, I think, was the simplest way to be able to notate the things and to be practical at the same time. And this is an example of the manuscript again, because I do extensive revisions, because this is a process that's always evolving. And you can see here an example of the notation. So Dory reads the 3 top staves, and the pianist in a way had it easy because it's just regular, normal 2 steps for the pianist.
Yeah, I liked this way of setting out the score. And interestingly enough, even though my 2 hands were just as active and in most cases more active than my voice, I still had the impression of accompanying myself while playing this piece. I still felt that my voice was kind of the leading element and the other material was accompanying.
Great, that's actually a great point because that's one of the ideas of this cycle. That's why there is no text, because I thought all the sounds should come from the piano and the voice should imitate or blend with the piano, but the piano should imitate and blend the voice to try to create like a unified sound world in which the piano is at the center and all the sounds come from the piano and go towards or into the piano. So that's actually like a very important aspect of the composition of the piece.
Why don't we play a little section?
Our most recent collaboration is called Minimaquina. It's from the cycle BURSZTYN. That's an image from the performance. This piece, Dory commissioned this piece for her festival, Blue Ridge Champion Music Festival. They were celebrating their 10-year anniversary. And for that reason, the instrumentation is a bit odd. So I decided to use like the recurrent players or the faculty that is usually part of the festival, which is these 3 wonderful pianists, the flutist and Dory herself. So it's a piece for her. It's a piece that try to showcase the faculty of Blue Ridge. So this cycle is inspired by the work of a Colombian artist, Felisa Bornstein. She created in the 60s, she created these sculptures using discarded materials that she put together. So what was interesting for me was to create musical pieces in which you can recognize certain elements, but they have been modified. So that's why I try to apply this idea to musical instruments. So I alter or I modify conventional musical instruments, right? So I do that with every single instrument in the pieces that belongs to this cycle. So I call them impossible objects because sometimes these preparations go so far that the instrument is completely, you cannot recognize it anymore. But you can still see some features of the original instrument, but it doesn't really work that way anymore. So for this piece, I built a prepared or modified megaphone. So I attach a large string drum to this megaphone, and Dory has to sing the whole piece throughout the whole piece. She sings inside the megaphone. And this was a very interesting piece to write because the megaphone completely changed the sound of the voice. And I use similar techniques and similar notation and actually residual compositional techniques that I didn't use in the previous two pieces. I don't know if you have any comments about your experience of singing through this.
Well, yeah, actually in this piece, the demands that you've made on me, on the voice, are actually a little bit more conventional than in the other pieces. There's, a lot of regular singing and some vocal fry and whispering and that kind of thing. But because everything is filtered through the megaphone, I really had this experience of being completely out of my voice. And so I sort of felt that in this piece, Camilo talks about impossible objects and how he creates these impossible objects by adding extrinsic elements to normal instruments. And I feel that with this piece, my transformation into an impossible object became complete because my entire vocal output was filtered through this really strange distortion, which was very fun.
Nice. So I think at this point it will be nice to hear the piece, and we could talk later about the notation and some of the techniques and some of the things involved. These are some of the ways that I decided to use to notate some of the techniques that I use on this piece. And as you can see, it's a very similar system to the ones that I use in previous pieces. But the sound quality is very different because the whole voice is being distorted and modified or rarefied in a way by the megaphone. And in this piece, I decided again to use a text. It's a very short text, and it was taken by an interview that Felisa BURSZTYN gave to a Colombian journalist, in which she says that art is experiment. So I thought that that was a very beautiful idea. So the whole piece uses only that text and the name of Felisa BURSZTYN. So I decided to use each syllable separately to produce these weird combinations of her name, because in a way, this whole cycle is a way to pay tribute to her, and it's an homage to her and to her work. So I'm kind of invocating her presence every time that these Minimaquinas are performed.
Nice.
So with this, so we come to the end of our presentation. So I will allow Dory to introduce her performance of the premiere of Plegaria Muda, and you will be able to hear the whole piece on her interpretation. So
this performance was recorded at the Banff Center in Alberta, Canada, in 2017, and Camilo and I had spent a wonderful few weeks there working together. And it's always a pleasure to be able to work together. And I think that these three pieces will be just the first of, I hope, of a long career of collaboration. Thanks.